So we are the pure consciousness, which is Shiva. And if you think about the blue pearl as Shakti, is the awareness of our own being. So she takes the form of this blue light and reflects back to us our own consciousness. And it's that same consciousness that's the basis of the universe and dwells within everyone and everything. So once we experience it within our own being, we've attained the knowledge of the inner self. We asked Muktananda that question one time. I said, Baba, what's it like to be self-realized? What's the goal? What's the end? And he said, I'll let you in on a little secret.
Welcome to the Endless Possibilities Podcast, where the journey of spiritual awakening and energy healing unfolds.
Hello, and welcome to the Endless Possibilities Podcast. My name is Garrett, and I'm very pleased to be introducing my next guest. Let me give him an introduction. Swami Brahmananda Saraswati was born David Donald Now on March 2nd, 1950 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, USA. He met Swami Muktananda and received Shakti Pat initiation in August 1975. He practiced sadhana with Muktananda in his ashrams for the next 8 years. He practiced Siddha Yoga and studied Kashmir Shaivism and Vedanta philosophies. In 1980, he received Sannyasa Diksha and was given the name Brahmananda. In 1981, Swami Muktananda instructed Brahmananda to establish an ashram in Los Angeles, California, which became the Siddha Meditation Center, Los Angeles. Muktananda appointed Brahmananda as the national coordinator of the Siddha centers and ashrams in the USA, including 35 ashrams and 350 meditation centers. Brahmananda, David Now, was very active in interfaith ministries in the USA and has traveled to more than 75 countries. In 1995, Brahmananda founded the God Realization Ministries, which taught the principle of Siddha Yoga in more than 200 Christian churches in the USA. From 2015 to 2019, he was a spiritual director of Simple Peace retreats in Assisi, Italy, and taught weekly silent meditation retreats for 5 years. The retreat center was named a top 10 retreat center in the world by numerous media, including CNN, Newsweek, Travel and Leisure magazine, and many more. Brahmananda is a graduate of Columbia University in New York City. He has also studied at universities in France, Lebanon, and Japan. Brahmananda, David Now, has lived in India for the past 4 years, where he offers satsang, conducts Shakti Pat intensive, and is actively involved in bringing meditation into the school systems in India. Brahmananda says, meditate on yourself. God dwells within you as you, and see God in everyone. Hi guys, I hope you're enjoying the show. I just have a quick favor to ask of you. So from our analytics, it shows that only 26% of the people who watch this podcast are actually subscribed. And if you could really do us a big favor and subscribe, because it will continue to help our channel grow and for us to reach new viewers. And it also helped for us to get the guests that you guys want to see. So if you would like to help us out, and if it just takes something as small as just clicking subscribe, please, please, please do so. It's such a big help to us, and it really, really helps to promote the show to a new audience. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the show. Today I'm joined by Swami Brahmananda. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you here.
Namaskar. Pleasure to meet you.
You too. Yes. So I just gave an introduction, a fascinating journey. Yeah. If you'd like to share what started you off on your spiritual journey.
Okay, well, I was in college. I was studying at Columbia University, and my roommate took a class in transcendental meditation. And he wasn't allowed to give us the mantra or anything, but he said, let's just sit and have no thoughts. And my mind was absolutely going crazy. I'd never actually looked at my mind before, but something happened, and it kindled a kind of a yearning to have some control over the mind. The next year at school, I took a leave from Columbia and traveled the world. Went to school in Paris for a semester and spent a year in Beirut, Lebanon. And it was there that I met a Sufi master and began a serious practice of meditation, spent a year there, and then spent the summer in Japan and lived in a Zen monastery. So I was really, really keen to find out about myself. I'd heard about Kundalini, I'd heard about Shakti Pat, but I hadn't really met anyone that could awaken that energy. And then it was in 1975 when I was living in New York City. My yoga teacher invited me to stay after yoga class for meditation. And she gave me the physical touch on behalf of her guru, and an awakening started to take place. I started having physical kriyas and breathing spontaneously, and much of what I'd heard about in the yogic scriptures and texts began to happen to me very naturally. So when she told me that Muktananda was coming to the United States, I was really, really eager to meet him. I traveled from New York to Oakland, California. And sadly enough, the day that I arrived, Muktananda had some kind of diabetic attack and was hospitalized. So I was really disappointed to arrive and not be able to meet him. But the next morning, he sent word that he was going to meet the newcomers in the hospital. So I was very eager to meet him. He was giving us a private darshan, and I had a feeling that this was my teacher. I was really keen on him accepting me as his student. So I remember that morning meditating extra long to purify my mind. I heard he could read people's minds, and I didn't want him reading any of those crazy thoughts that I had as a young man. And I put on my spiritual clothes. I wanted to impress him so that he'd accept me as a disciple, and had a couple of cups of coffee. I wanted my mind to be alert in case he asked me an esoteric question, like, what's the sound of one hand clapping, or what did your face look like before your mother? All those kind of Zen koan things. So I brought to meet him in the hospital. He had a waiting room set up where he was greeting the new students. I was poised for that test question, trying to keep my mind clear. And he looked at me and he said, "What's your name?" And strange enough, my mind was completely blank. I couldn't remember my own name. And he said, and he swatted me with his peacock feathers. And he kind of chuckled. This, I guess, it happened before in his presence. It was like a mountain of Shakti. I just, my mind wouldn't even function. It was so quiet. And he said, "Where are you from?" Gave me a second chance, But again, I couldn't remember where I was from, but I remembered my name. I said, my name's David now. He's, "Oh, very good, very good." I was a couple of beats behind him, And then he said, "Well, what kind of work do you do?" Again, no idea, but I remembered where I was from. I said, "Baba, I'm from New York." But the problem was I wasn't really from New York. I was just living there. From Pittsburgh. So again, he swatted me with the feathers, and I was just filled with Shakti, with divine power. He said, "Go sit over here." So he was greeting other people, and he had me go sit against the wall. And I went into the deepest meditation I'd ever had. I didn't realize it at the time, but he'd actually given me the transmission and put me into Samadhi. I sat there for maybe 3 hours, At a certain point in the meditation, Muktananda glanced over at me, and there was a bolt of light that came from his eyes, entered into my heart, and there was just an explosion of love, of peace. Everything I'd read about in the scriptures about the nature of the inner self, I was having a direct experience of it. I sat there for probably 3 hours. When I came out of meditation, no one was there. They let me sit. But I knew that this was what I was looking for. And so I lived with Muktananda for the next 7 years until he left his body. I mean, from that moment, I never left him. It was I never even went back to New York City to clean out my apartment. This was what I was looking for. So I became his disciple and spent the next 7 years, 8 years in his ashrams doing the sadhana of Siddha meditation.
Wow, that's a great story. Wow.
Well, one of the things as an add-on to it was that when I met Muktananda, I was on crutches because I had crippling rheumatoid arthritis. I couldn't wear shoes. My feet were swollen, and I used to get cortisone injections, and I had to take butazolidine pills, and the prognosis was just going to be worse and worse. Mm. After meeting Muktananda, when I would sit for meditation, spontaneously, I would break into Bastrika or Kabbalah body. Different schools call it different things. The fast breathing. And this would go on for 30, 40 minutes unbroken. I can't physically do that. I've never been able to just sit and do pranayama like that for that length of time. But spontaneously, the awakened Kundalini knew that this is what my body needed. It needed a lot of prana in it. After 30, 40 minutes of Bastrika, my body would begin to perform various movements, either mudras or what we call kriyas, physical movements of the body. My body would sway in a circle. My neck would go back and forth really fast. I would spontaneously go into these variety of yoga postures. And over a period, and this happened for about 9 months, every time I would sit for meditation, this would happen. And at the end of 9 months, all of the arthritic deposits were removed. The condition was in full remission. Went back to my doctor and said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I've never seen anything like this." So it was a spontaneous healing of rheumatoid arthritis, and I haven't had it since. So what a blessing.
And do you feel that was a purification of the Kundalini rising?
Absolutely. It was a result of the Kundalini rising. And as the Kundalini arises, whatever limitations, whatever obstacles that we have get removed, and it's different for all of us. Some of us have emotional kriyas. I know friends who would laugh and would weep and have all sorts of old emotions come up. I never really went through that. Mine was largely physical, but it's an intelligent energy, this Kundalini. So that whatever it is that we need, it's completely customized for each person. We call these kriyas, and they can take place physically, mentally, emotionally. I can tell you that my whole belief system was completely cleaned out, and I started afresh and began learning the yogic scriptures, the Eastern scriptures. And my whole viewpoint of the world was shifted as a result.
Okay. I wonder, can we talk a little bit about the importance of Kundalini on a spiritual seeker's journey? So why would one seek out to awaken Kundalini?
Well, they say that the Kundalini is asleep. We talk about awakening the Kundalini. In truth, it's already awake, but it's only functioning at a capacity of its potential. So if you think about the Kundalini as the primal life force, so when Supreme Consciousness decided to contract itself to become an individual, it took residence and became the life force. It's the force that makes us breathe. I mean, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even when we're sleeping, we breathe. What is that energy? It's the Kundalini that's drawing the breath in and drawing the breath out. It's digesting our food. It's regulating the heartbeat. It's already functioning because it's the life force itself. But it's said to be functioning at just a tiny fraction of its capacity because there's a whole other dimension. So until the Kundalini is awakened, the divine power, actually keeps us in Maya, keeps us in the illusion. And that's its function. Shaivism, which is the tradition I teach from, says that we are all the supreme consciousness, but in a contracted form, sporting, playing as human beings. And so the function of the Kundalini is to keep us playing as human beings until we're tired of the game, until we want to get rid of the suffering in life. And then we begin to turn within, and the Kundalini is repurposed. So instead of keeping us in Maya, keeping us in illusion, now the senses, the mind, all the energies of the body are directed towards awakening to the truth of who we are. So in a sense, you could say the Kundalini is awakened, but the truth is it's our consciousness that gets awakened with the assistance and the support of the Kundalini Shakti, the divine power that resides within all of us. And this is a conscious energy. So whatever it is that we need, whether it's mental, physical, emotional, life changes, that's what the Kundalini brings into our experience.
Okay, so in terms of awakening this sleeping force within us, we receive a transmission called Shakti Pat. And can you tell the listeners what Shakti Pat is exactly, and how does it awaken the Kundalini life force?
Well, there are certain practices that people do, different forms of pranayama and worship and things that people can do through their self-effort. That just takes years and a lot of time and a lot of really focused discipline in order to awaken this energy on its own. So traditionally, it's done through the grace of a living master, of a guru. Shakti Pat, literally, Shakti is the divine power. Another name for the Kundalini. So Kundalini is the contracted form of the universal Shakti. Pat means the descent of or the transmission of. So when we enter into a relationship with a lineage, it's not a personal power. We say we go to a guru, and we think of gurus as human beings, this guru, that guru, but it's really a cosmic function. It's a function of universal consciousness, anugraha, to bestow the energy that removes the illusion. And so we come into contact with a particular lineage, and there are many. And in relationship with that lineage, we meet a teacher who becomes simply the vehicle for the energy to flow through. It's nothing personal. It's a universal power that flows through and awakens that consciousness in the seeker. And then it's the function of the living guru to give the discipline, to give the structure, to teach the practices that will allow the energy to unfold more fully and more fully. And this is really the value of the guru. In addition to the transmission, it's the guidance, that there's no one way, no one set of practices that's right for everybody. Some people, for example, are very emotional, so they might be directed by their guru to practice bhakti, to worship their ishta devata, their own deity, to do kirtan and repeat mantras. Someone else might be devoted to work, physical service. They would do karma yoga. First group would do bhakti yoga. Others would do karma yoga. Some have a natural predilection for meditation. Others for studying the scriptures. You can do all of these, but the guru just says, okay, you do this. This is what's best for you. In my relationship with Muktananda over the years that I spent with him, there were times that he had me meditating deeply, meditating and studying the scriptures. There were other periods of time where he said, no, don't meditate, don't read the scriptures, work in the kitchen, chop vegetables. This was something I really didn't want to do. I was having such bliss, meditating and studying the scriptures. He says, no, you go into the kitchen and chop vegetables. Don't do anything else. And I would say I resisted that, honestly. I didn't like getting up at 3:30 in the morning, chopping vegetables until lunchtime, and then coming back and chopping vegetables. And I wasn't really very good at it. one day Muktananda came in and we're chopping cucumbers. And I was kind of lackadaisically cutting the cucumbers, wishing I could meditate or something. He took the knife out of my hand and he chopped the cucumber. I'd never seen anybody chop that fast, like lightning. And each one of the slices was paper thin. And he looked at me and he said, there's 30 pieces there. Count them. So I meticulously counted each piece and there was only 27. So I was in a pickle. Do I tell him that there's 30? There's a whole group of people watching this. Do I tell them it's 30 or do I tell them it's 27? And I knew that the guru, there was a plan. So I said, Baba, there's 27 pieces. And he laughed. He said, turn the knife over. Turn the knife over, stuck to the knife. There were 3 pieces. And then he said to me, that's the true meditation. One pointed flow of consciousness in your work. That's meditation. Learn to chop like that. So having received the directive from the guru, that became my passion, for the next maybe 6 months or so. I just chopped vegetables. And one morning we were chopping bananas. And by this time I'd progressed enough that I had a whole team of people peeling bananas so I could chop them for the fruit salad. And as I was chopping, it was as if it was like those old Kung Fu movies where time slows down and you could see the space. Everything was like in slow motion, right? And I could see each cut of the knife going through the bananas. And I was fully present. And there was this glow, there was this light in the room. And I was filled with ecstasy. It was no different than my ecstatic meditations while I was chopping the vegetables. And as I was having this experience, there was a knock on the door. And Baba was at the door, and through his translators, he looked and he said, you're complete in here. It's enough time in the kitchen. Now go and teach meditation. So this is one of the benefits of having a living guru, is that they can direct the periods and the time of your sadhana. This is for work. This is for meditation. This is for learning. Yeah.
So it almost seems like he knew that he wanted you to have the experience of meditation in your everyday state. So while you were working, while you were carrying out your chores, that too was also meditation.
This was one of his key teachings. In fact, he used to do a whole 2-day intensive called something like this, without leaving your family, without leaving your children, without leaving your work, without leaving the world. Realize God. God dwells within you as you. Monks can renounce the world and live and meditate, but most people that came to meet Muktananda were householders. They had a family, they had a career, they had a job, and he wanted them to learn God's everywhere. God's in everything, and that your work should become your meditation. It shouldn't be that now I'm going to work and then I'm going to go meditate. No. Work itself is meditation. Karma yoga, for example, if we truly focus our mind, yoga is skill in action. So if we can, whatever it is that we do, whether we're a doctor or a lawyer or a cook or an athlete, if we can focus the mind on one thing and not let it wander, that's true meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And the divine can be revealed in anything that we do.
Yeah.
One of the scriptures I love to teach from is something called the Vidyan Bhairava Tantra. It's an ancient scripture, part of the tradition of Kashmir Shaivism. And it lists 112 ways of meditating, mostly in the world. Yes, there's sections in it teach you how to meditate in silence and go within, but it tells you, look at a beautiful sunset. When we look at a beautiful sunset, we have a sense of beauty and awe arising from within. Close your eyes, go within, and notice where that joy, that grandeur, that beauty is coming from. It's not coming out of the sunset and into us. It's arising from within us. Mm-hmm. Listening to beautiful music, often moved to tears by the beauty of it. When we close our eyes and just feel the joy that's arising. Eating a delicious meal, seeing an old friend, all of these different opportunities to recognize the self in our daily life. So once we recognize the nature of the inner self through meditation, we get a little taste of that, then we can we explore ways to experience that in every experience of life, living it in every moment. So we're not meant to become monks and go live in the caves in the Himalayas. We're householders living in the world, particularly in the West. And every moment is an opportunity to experience our own being.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Very, very well put. Okay, so you're living with Muktananda now. Your Kundalini is awakened, and shifts in consciousness. What started to change? Like we're all familiar with terms like self-realization and unity consciousness. Did you start to have these shifts in consciousness while living with Muktananda?
Absolutely. The biggest shift was no longer looking for happiness outside of myself. Up to that point, I was a driven man. I was a filmmaker and career, and wanted to have a successful film career. But there was a filmmaker when I was a young man who received the Academy Award, and I remember as he was receiving it, he said, "Here I am at the pinnacle of success, but who am I? Why am I doing all this? What's the meaning of life?" So as a young man, I was driven to learn the purpose of life and then live it rather than discover it at the end of life. And fundamental to Muktananda's teachings were that God dwells within you as you. And this is the source of happiness. It's the source of joy. It's the source of peace. Up to that point, my life was totally externally driven, looking for the next relationship, the next film job, the next way to make money, buy a big house. I was looking for happiness outside of myself. And once I had the experience that it comes from within, it completely changed the purpose of my life and the way I lived my life. So these days I can be perfectly content just sitting in my apartment, meditating, maybe going in the evening for a chant, doing little yoga, but every moment has been transformed. Whereas before, every moment was satisfying a desire. Oh, I'm hungry, I need to eat this, or I want that, or going from desire to desire. Now I go from joy to joy. I still need to eat every day, but it's a source of joy. It's a source of pleasure, eating the food and feeling the delight, the relishing of that, listening to music, seeing the beautiful sunset, chanting the name of God. It's like a reversal. Something happened inside where everything shifted from looking outside to inside. Yeah.
Wow. Well, okay. And okay, so it seems that during a spiritual awakening, right, we can shift through our perceptions, right? So how we perceive the world changes. There's a kind of like the awareness becomes aware of itself, and then there's a disconnection from the ego. And I've heard people have this experience without having a Kundalini awakening or a rising. So can you tell us how that might happen and what's the purpose of the Kundalini rising? From my understanding, eventually what happens is Shakti rises and merges with Shiva in the crown, right? For a sort of an enlightening experience of unity consciousness. So can we talk a little bit about that, like that shift into self-realization and what the role of the Kundalini is? Because it seems to bring the body into the experience of the awakening, right? The body gets to feel the love and the Shakti and the enlightenment.
Mm-hmm. So the word yoga means to yoke together, to join together. And many of us enter the spiritual path with a sense of disconnection, that there's a physical body and there's an emotional self, and there's a separation. Particularly, I know I was raised in the Christian tradition where we mortified the flesh, so to speak, where there was a disconnect. And the idea, even in some of the yogic tradition, is to disconnect from the body, to disconnect from the ego. The tantric tradition, which is really what I'm part of, the Siddha Yoga, Kashmir lineage, integrates, joins together the body, the mind, the soul, the spirit, so that they become one. Once we can become one with our own inner being, then we can become one with everything around us as well. So it's no longer a sense of separation and disconnection. For example, the ego. Many of us in the early days of our sadhana tried to kill the ego, tried to destroy the ego. But the ego has its own function. It tells us when we need to eat. It tells us not to pick up that snake and play with it. It has a function. But for most of us, it's the master rather than the servant. The yogi, once we have an experience of the self, now can view the ego as a tool, as something that can be used. And if it misbehaves, we're centered in our own being, so we can observe that and witness, oh, I'm just having an ego attack. That's that crazy belief system in separation. We don't try to kill it. We try to understand it. We go to a place beyond it so that we can see it for what it is. One of my very dear friends, Swami Shankarananda, when we were in India, once asked my Baba in question and answer session, he said, I have such a big ego, how can I get rid of my ego? And my Baba said, no, you don't have too big an ego. Your ego is too small. You think you're that body. You think that you're that Swami. The truth is, you're Shiva. You're the universe. You're universal consciousness. So just change what it is that we identify with. So if we identify with the physical body, we identify with the ego, we'll get stuck in that. We identify with the universal consciousness within, then we join yoga, become united with everyone and everything. So this is not a renunciant path, although I have to tell you that desires and things naturally fall away. I'm not a very good renunciant, even though I'm a Swami. Every time I tried to renounce something, it would come back and I'd want it more. But over the course of meditating and going into the self, I found that there were greater pleasures in life than the pleasures of the senses, and pleasures of the world. Once you discover the joy that's within, that's where you go for the joy, for the peace, for the love inside. So all the worldly desires and passions that I had as a young man, they naturally fell away. I never had to renounce anything. I remember in my early days of sadhana, my Baba was giving a talk, and it was called "Peace Follows Renunciation." It's a long story. I won't tell it, but that phrase, "Peace follows renunciation," really stuck in my mind, and I decided to renounce the world. I had a full head of hair and a long beard, and so this day I shaved my head, shaved my beard, and decided to renounce the world. And I put all my hair into a bag. And I came up on darshan to Muktananda, and I presented him with the bag, And I said, Baba, I've renounced the world. I'm very proud of that I've renounced the world, and presented him with the bag. And he looked at me and went, oh, just don't renounce the world. Just renounce your own ego. That's enough. And he said, now take this hair, go down to the ocean. We were in Oakland, California. There was a marina nearby. So throw this in the ocean and renounce your ego. That's enough. So I went down to the marina, wadded up all the hair, threw it into the marina, and it wouldn't sink. I said, I'm offering my ego, but it wouldn't sink. So I threw a rock, and it finally hit the hair in the water, and the ego went down. 2 seconds later, it's back up again. And I kept pelting it with rocks. I couldn't get it to sink. And so this is kind of a metaphor for my life. Every time I've tried to renounce something, it keeps coming back. But everything that I've wanted to renounce and let go of fell away very naturally through the joy of the self, not through the pain of renouncing and trying to get rid of things. So this is a very natural, spontaneous path. That's the beauty of the Kundalini, is it's very compassionate, it's omniscient, it guides us so we can let go of things that no longer serve us in a way that's not too painful.
Okay, so it seems that the attachments naturally just drop away going through this process, right? Rather than us using our intellect to say, okay, today I'm going to abstain from alcohol or sex or, you know, watching TV. It seems that as we go through the spiritual awakening, as the Kundalini starts to rise, starts to purify the different energy centers, all of them things just drop away naturally.
They do. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we noticed that when we were in India. There were sort of two camps in India. There were the Yogis and the Bogis. Now, the Yogis, you know, we use the word facetiously, and in a sense, the Yogis were very austere, wouldn't drink chai, wouldn't eat sweets, went to every program, and were very austere. The Bogis, on the other hand, would go for a sweet roll or go for a cup of coffee, and had an easier way of living with this naturally rather than being staunch renunciants. And what I noticed that over the years that many of those yogis fell from the path. It was just too strict, you know. Yeah. And the so-called Bogis, who had a moderate lifestyle, who did the practices, but were compassionate with themselves and were honest with themselves, are still on the path. You know, it's very much like the Buddha, you know, was very austere, you know, a very strict renunciant. And he had his awakening one day when he was listening to the master musician instructing his student. He said, if you don't tighten the string tight enough, the music will be flat. But if you tighten it too much, the string will break. And it's really a wonderful metaphor for spiritual practice. You need to do enough tapasya, enough practice in order to grow and stretch beyond your comfort level. But you don't want to overdo it, because at a certain point, you'll just throw up your hand and say, I can't do this, and leave. And I've seen many people do that. So finding the middle way, a way to cooperate with the Kundalini. And if we really get in tune with this inner energy, it will guide us in terms of what practices we should do, how much we should do. And it shifts and changes over the years. Shifts a lot. I mean, my early years, I did a lot of hatha yoga and bhastrika and a lot of physical stuff. Went through periods where I would just meditate, other periods where I would study very intently. Now it's just a kind of a much more mellow. I read a little bit and study a little bit, meditate a little bit, chant a bit, and love people. That's the key. If the practices that we're doing are generating love and peace and joy, we're on the right path. If it's causing us to be angry and upset and contracted, you know, we'll probably need to look more closely at what we're doing.
Yeah. So you have this Shakti, the divine Shakti in your system that's turning into an inner compass to guide you, okay, on your spiritual journey. Would you almost say that the Shakti becomes the guru?
I would say the Shakti becomes the guru. The purpose of a guru is to wean the disciples from being disciples and to listen to the inner guru. So you could say that the Shakti is the inner guru. And it's good to spend time with a physical guru, because they can tune you into that energy when it's the voice of the self, when it's the voice of the Shakti speaking, as compared to when it's the voice of the ego. This is one of the real challenges in sadhana, is if we look within, what really is the voice of the self? What is the Shakti guiding us towards? And how so many of us get confused by that and listen to the voice of the ego. You know, so this discrimination, viveka. And this is one of the reasons we spend time with a living guru, if we possibly can, because he can tell us, oh, that's the voice of the ego, and that's the voice of the self. The voice of the self usually is quiet. The voice of the ego speaks first and loudest, you know, and is very self-righteous and very demanding, whereas it's that still small voice inside. And when I say voice, it's not like spoken words. It's an impulse. It's an inner feeling. It's an inner knowing directly that's even beyond words. And what I have found in my life is that the Shakti not only guides me from within, but guides me from without. That there have been certain things I've really, really wanted to do and had a strong desire to do. And the Shakti would simply close that door and redirect me another way. So it's it's a conversation with God in a sense. When you really get in touch with that inner Shakti, it's just looking at the Shakti speaking through all the voices around us, guiding us. It can be through a billboard, or it can be a piece of music, or a conversation. One of the ways that I get guidance often is I'll be contemplating something, and I like to go out and take a walk. I get inspiration when I walk. And many times as I'm contemplating, a couple will walk by in the other direction, and I'll hear one sentence of their conversation, and they'll be answering directly. I see you nodding your head. You've had that experience too. But life, in a sense, becomes a conversation with God when we're open to it. When that's our
it's
perspective.
Yeah, I mean, billboards become messengers, songs become messengers. You know, you might see a bus go by, and you'll catch a little bit of the advertisement, and it'll be like, oh, that's what I need to do. So yeah,
exactly.
And the beauty is then you can kind of like, you understand that your reality is God, and it's God communicating with you and trying to steer you in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wonder, for those who don't have an experience with Shakti, can we talk a little bit about like what that feels like? What when we receive a Shakti Pat, what is going on in our systems? When we receive the Shakti, do we keep it? Do we need to keep going back and getting more? Could we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And I have to preface before I go into it that it's customized. It's different for everyone. Some people have absolutely wild experiences. I was of that type. I had wild experiences, visions, lights, physical kriyas, movements throughout the body. Others, it's not so dramatic. One of my very dear friends who teaches with me here in Rishikesh, my friend Brenda, once shared with my Baba. She said, I've been taking intensives with you for 7 years and doing sadhana with you, and I haven't had any of these experiences that I hear about, but my life has been completely transformed. So sometimes it's a very quiet process where there's just a subtle shift in perception that takes place over time. Others, it's very dramatic. It's like instant. They have an experience of their own self, kriyas, lights, all sorts of things, explosions of love. So it's completely unique. For me, when I received the physical touch, I literally felt energy entering here. And that's what the scriptures say, is that it's a subtle transfer of energy, a flow. The guru, in a sense, becomes a vehicle for the divine. It's not personal power, but becomes a vehicle for the flow of the energy. I felt that in here it was warm, and it began to swirl. It began to swirl my head. I began to rotate my neck, and then my whole body began to rotate. So I felt it very, very physically. Others, the energy begins to move, and it begins to poke at unresolved emotional issues. So some people might experience an emotional roller coaster. They came and they wanted to be in bliss. Like we do these 2-day meditation intensives, and it's very common for the first day to be a little traumatic for people because old unresolved issues. You're sitting in meditation, all of a sudden you remember that thing that happened in high school that made you so upset, or that relationship, or whatever it was. Those things come to the surface. So whatever stuffed energies, whatever repressed emotions that we haven't dealt with, come to the surface so they can be purified. It's kind of like, I used to have a swimming pool when I lived in California. The pool would look clean. The pool man would come every Tuesday, and he'd scrape the bottom, and all the dirt would come to the top, and then he'd scoop it off. Kundalini's like that. It's physical, mental, emotional. Sometimes people will have the expectation that their mind will be completely still once they receive Shakti Pat. And they find the exact opposite, that all of a sudden it starts spinning, and we get stuck in a train of thought that we can't get rid of, and that's for the purpose of purification. So once the Shakti awakens, we recognize that we need to put our awareness wherever the Shakti is working. So if it's physical, we can enhance the experience and work with the Kundalini by looking at the actual location where the energy is moving. If there are certain memories that are coming up, we simply witness them. We bring our awareness. We don't try to avoid them or reject them or suppress them in any way. We become fully immersed in it. I guess what I'm really saying is that once the Shakti is awakened, the Shakti guides your meditation. Sometimes it's full of thoughts. Sometimes there's emotions. Sometimes there's physical kriyas, and we just go with the flow.
Yeah. Okay. So we received the transmission of Shakti Pat, right? Say we're on an intensive. We leave, we go back to our own practice. What does one need to do then to kind of, because the way I see it, it's kind of like a spark you've been given, right? And it's up to you then to fan the flames, to get that to grow. So the aspirant, after they receive Shakti Pat, they return home. What should they do? What's part of their path after receiving the transmission?
Well, there's two aspects to it. One is the practices that we need to do in order to keep the process going. And the other is to be conscious of our leaks. Many people have the experience of going back and leaking the energy out. And those are different for different people. Mostly it's different kinds of thoughts, judgments, old grievances, drinking alcohol, taking drugs. Those sorts of things are not really good for the Shakti. So the first thing is to do the practices that's recommended by your teacher. In my case, Muktananda said people should make a commitment to meditate every day. And after people take an intensive with me here in Rishikesh or wherever we are, I recommend that they meditate for at least 30 minutes a day. And if they can do up to an hour, they can. They could also meditate maybe a couple times a day, 20 minutes, morning, evening, to continue to meditate every day. That doesn't mean you miss a couple of days and you come back, because it's the repetition, it's the doing the practice over a long period of time that bears the fruit. And I have to be honest with you, sometimes you don't feel like it. Your back hurts, your knee hurts, you're busy, you got things to do. That's why I encourage people to get up, take a shower, do it first thing in the morning. For 25 years, my time was 4:30. I would get up at 4 and shower and get cleaned up. By 4:30 for 25 years, I never missed a day, and that was my particular time. It's called the Brahma Muhurta in India. It's the hour of Brahman. It's quiet. There's not a lot of vrittis, not a lot of thoughts flying around in the city that you're living. It's a quiet time. It's a good time to go into deep meditation. So continue to meditate. And I often will encourage people to find a sangha, to find a community where they can practice together, even if it's just once a week. You don't have to go move into an ashram or something, but just to keep it going, to be around other people who are on the path, because strange things happen. When you meditate, you're doing, things happen that you don't understand. And if you're not with your teacher, it's good to be around other people who maybe have experienced that themselves. You can share with them, they can share with you, and give you some insight into how to use whatever's happening to you as part of your sadhana. So those are the two things that I really encourage: meditation and community of some sort to keep it going on. There are other practices that we can do, but those are the two main ones.
Okay. I wonder, can you talk a little bit about how the ability to give Shakti Pat opened up for you?
Well, it was a direct command from my guru. As I say, I lived with him while he was in his body for 7 years, and towards the end of the last 3 years of his life, he asked me to be his master of ceremonies. So I traveled with Muktananda for 3 years around the world, was his master of ceremonies. And then in 1981, in January of 81, he asked me to start being his master of ceremonies at his intensives. He used to do an intensive every month. So I would sit right at his feet and do all the announcements and do the intro talk and that sort of thing. And he instructed me to watch what he was doing. At the end of about 4 or 5 months, he introduced me to the people of LA as their teacher. He was going to leave me behind. He was going to go back to India. He said, treat Brahmananda with the same love and respect that you teach, that you treat me. And he instructed me then on how to give Shakti Pat, and gave me his clothes, the clothes that he wore when he was giving Shakti Pat. He gave me a nice silk kurta and lungi and jacket, and gave me his peacock feathers and his sandals, and said, once a month, I want you to do this intensive. He said, don't feel that you're giving Shakti Pat. You, Brahmananda, have nothing to do with this. Empty yourself of everything. Remember me. And to the extent that you can remember me, remember the lineage, the power will flow to you. He says, as soon as you think you're doing anything at all, there'll be a price to pay. It won't be, in other words, I felt that. So whenever a little part of the ego would say, oh, you're giving Shakti Pat, I would feel the energy really busting me, So Muktananda left Los Angeles in May of 81. So in June, we had our first intensive without Muktananda there. And I was a little nervous, giving an intensive, giving Shakti Pat on behalf of the lineage. And I had Baba's sandals there. So before I went around and touched everybody with the peacock feathers, I put my head on his sandals. I said, Baba, please do this. I can't do this. And as I had my head on the shoes, I looked up. For some reason, I was guided to look up, and I could see Baba's face above me, and his face was planted on the feet of his guru's sandals, Bhagavan Nityananda. And I leaned back further, and I could see that Bhagavan Nityananda's face was on the feet of his guru. As far back as I could see, all the way back, it was this unbroken lineage. And all I had to do was to remember the lineage and not let Brahmananda get in the way of it. So I've been doing these now for 44 years, I think it is. Once a month, we have these Shakti Pat intensives, and it brings me great delight to do it. I mean, I never feel the presence of the lineage more powerfully for me personally than I do during these intensives, because the energy shows up. When we have these intensives, it was just like it was when I was with Baba, when I was at his intensives. And so it brings me so much closer. And I do these as much for myself as I do for others.
Sure. And I can really, I can sense the love and the humility coming from you. It's really beautiful. I wonder, could we actually talk a little bit about that, the reverence that you have for your guru? And I can really, like, just speaking to you, I can totally feel that coming, that there's a respect and just a love for your guru that's never gone away, even though he left the body.
It increases every day. I mean, all that I am or all that I ever will be, honestly, I owe to my relationship with him. I was a very sincere seeker for many, many years, traveled the world, but he was the one who became the vehicle for the bestowal of grace on me. And as a human being, he was just a lovable human being. He was the funniest man I've ever met, filled with wisdom, filled with joy. And it was very easy to fall in love with him, and he gave me so much love. He always saw the best in me. He always pushed me to do more than I thought I could do. Even though as a young man, I was a sort of a compulsive overachiever, it came from a place of feeling inadequate, feeling not good enough. And so many things that he did. For example, he made me his master of ceremony with thousands and thousands of disciples. He chose me to stand up every day and to represent him and to talk about the programs. And for the first 6 months, I was dreadful. I was so frightened that my voice would choke up and I couldn't speak. And it was like when he put up with me, and he kept, you can do this, And then he gave me sannyas when I didn't think I was worthy of it. He said, when we go to Los Angeles, you'll become a Swami. So, and then he left me in charge of his largest ashram. Just always had me doing things that I didn't think I was capable of doing. And really going a long way towards removing that primal sense of angst that I'm not good enough, that I could be more. And we all have this. We all have it. It's called the Anabambala in the tradition of Kashmir Shaivism. It's part of the divine plan that we all realize that we're not whole and that we're looking to become whole. And through his grace, I've recognized that I am whole. I always was. I just never knew it. And that was his teachings to us all the time, that everyone we meet, they're already whole. They're already the self. And we just need to make that shift from believing that we're the body to recognizing that we're the Atman. We're the pure consciousness, pure, whole, perfect, as we are already. So it's self-realization is really that simple. We make it so complicated. It's just self-realization means you recognize that I'm the spirit and I have a body. I'm a spirit and I have a body. Yeah. So it can be gradual, this recognition of yourself, or it can happen instantly. In my own case, my Baba gave me a direct experience of it the first time I met him. And of course, it kind of dwindled. I had my own leaks and it was gone in a few days. And then I had to earn it. Then I had to do the sadhana to go from it being a state experience to a permanent stage of development. So I've spent the last 45 years developing, my own self. So it's like one of the things that a guru will do is he'll give you a direct taste of the experience of the self, so that's all you'll want. That's all you want. You have tasted the ecstasy of it and the joy of the self, and all the other things just pale in comparison.
So it seems it's almost like you get a peak experience, and that sort of ignites like a flame, right? You then that's the start of your spiritual journey, right? You get a taste of something way greater than what you ever believed you were, and then it closes down. And then it seems to be like, okay, that's what I want to get to. Now I'm going to start my spiritual journey, my sadhana.
Yes. That's what we actually call sadhana. Sadhana is the practices that you do after receiving Shakti Pat from a guru. He prescribes the sadhana that you should do, the practices, and you do those until you're complete.
Okay, wonderful. So I read Swami Muktananda's book, and I think maybe twice I read it. Beautiful book. He speaks about the blue pearl and these different pearls that turned up for him. And I was listening to another one of your talks where you entered this blue consciousness. Was this the same as the blue pearl that Muktananda talks about?
Well, it's really difficult to describe the reality beyond this reality. Muktananda describes seeing the blue pearl in his meditation for a long time. And then at a certain point, the blue pearl exploded. And that consciousness, think about that consciousness maybe being seated here. So I'm conscious of Brahmananda. I'm conscious of this body. What if that consciousness expanded to fill the universe? And the universe became your body. This is the way I understand Muktananda describing it in Play of Consciousness. Through his transmission to me, I had the experience of going directly to the fully expanded consciousness of the blue pearl. It happened after I was in a plane crash, which is a long story. I don't want to go into all the details of it. Sure. But he called me in and I put my head on his feet, and I felt the energy just vibrating. It was almost like being plugged into electrical sockets. It was that intense. And then when I went to leave him, there were no forms. There was just infinite blue, the blue light of consciousness. And this was what I experienced at the moment of Muktananda's Mahasamadhi, when he left his body. the morning that he left was in October of 1982. I was running an ashram in Los Angeles on his behalf. And after the morning prayers and everything, I went out surfing. I went down to Malibu Beach and was having a great time surfing. And when I came back, I took my shower, and it was a late morning when I was just unavoidably drawn into meditation. That's not normally my meditation. It's like 11:30 in the morning, and I was just woozy, drunk as could be. So I sat in my meditation place on my cushion, went into meditation. And in the meditation, I had a vision of Muktananda coming into the room, putting his hand on my head. And again, it was like that electrical current that's like being plugged into a socket. And it just kept his hand on my head, and it was just ecstasy. Then he turned to leave, and I would never remain seated in his presence. I would always follow him out, but I couldn't move. I was just rooted to my chair. And he went to the door, opened the door. Instead of the hallway being there, the entire universe was there. It was like a night sky, and I could see all the stars and planets and the moon. And Baba's body, his physical body, as he was walking out, gradually began to expand. Every cell, every molecule began to expand and enter into the planets and the stars. And his body just completely dissolved, and there was just this blue light of consciousness everywhere. I sat in the stage for a couple hours, just wallowing in this delightful experience. When I got the phone call that was the moment that Baba left his body. And it's often said that when the Guru leaves, he leaves his Shakti with it. He enters into the disciple in full measure. And many of my Guru brothers and sisters had that or a similar kind of experience. Now, whenever Baba appears to me, he appears out of that field of infinite. I see the night sky, and I see the scintillating blue light and the blue pearls, and he comes and materializes and speaks to me. So the connection has remained all these many years. It's never weakened.
That's a beautiful, beautiful story. Really, yeah, beautiful. So the blue consciousness, would you say that's the mind of God?
You could say, yeah, you could say that's the mind of God. So if Shiva, pure consciousness, is just simply that being itself, the act of the dynamic part of that would be called the Shakti. And you could say that its first form is of light, and a light with movement, as it were, called spanda, movement, as it were, a throb of pulsating consciousness. And it's that consciousness that contracts to become the human mind. So our own mind, not the brain, but the mind that kind of guides the brain, is universal consciousness, but it is no different from universal consciousness, but it's just in a contracted form that takes the form of the objects perceived. That's why the yoga scriptures say, bring your mind to a place of stillness, because when there's no thoughts, there's no vrittis, no vikalpas, no thoughts in the mind reverts back to its natural state, which is pure consciousness.
So that blue, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So what I was going to say is that blue consciousness, you would say that we are a spark. We contain a spark of that within us. Could that be what the blue pearl is when we start to see it? So we start to see the little spark of that blue consciousness, and eventually we get pulled into it, and it turns into the ocean, like the mind of God that we are a part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be a very interesting way to describe it. So we are the pure consciousness, which is Shiva. And if you think about the blue pearl as Shakti, is the awareness of our own being. So she takes the form of this blue light and reflects back to us our own consciousness. And it's that same consciousness that's the basis of the universe and dwells within everyone and everything. So once we experience it within our own being, we call that Atma Vyapti. We've attained the knowledge of the inner self, Atma Vyapti. Shaivism has an additional term that they use called Shiva Vyapti, which is we can then see that same consciousness in everyone, in everything, whether it's in meditation or even in the waking state. So just experiencing Samadhi in meditation is very lofty, but there's more. Shaivism says you can go beyond that to seeing it in everyone, in everything, at all times, in all places. That's the definition of Sat, of the truth, is that dwells within you, that dwells within everyone, in all places, and in all things, at all times. And that's the goal of our practice, to recognize that. My Baba would say, meditate on your own self, honor yourself, love your own being. God dwells within you, as your own consciousness. So we can use the word God, we can use Shiva, Krishna, Brahman, Allah. Or even if we're an atheist, this doesn't require the belief in a particular form of a deity. But we all know that we have a self, and this self is divine. The self is, in fact, no different from the universal consciousness.
So it seems that there, on the journey of awakening, that there is a final goal, right? Which seems to be to recognize God in everybody, in everything. So it's like God realization eventually, that we can see that in everyone. The ego isn't, dividing everything up into me and mine and them. And we see everything as one, as God.
As one. We asked Muktananda that question one time. I said, Baba, what's it like to be self-realized? What's the goal? What's the end? And he said, I'll let you in on a little secret. There's no end. It gets deeper and more profound every day. That we can realize that God is everywhere, but our consciousness just keeps expanding. Our capacity to love keeps increasing until there's no limit to it. Yeah.
Okay. So it seems that there's realizations that can happen in an instant, in a flash, and our perception of how we see reality changes. But it seems that our capacity to become love, to experience more love, that's never ending, right? That's always going to go on. We can always move into greater states of love.
Yes, absolutely. So we can have state experiences and we can have permanent stages of development. So we can reach a state which often people call Jivan Mukta or moksha or liberation, where we've realized who we are. And we don't fall back from that. We've sort of attained that stage of awareness. But it doesn't mean that we lose our humanity. We can still, for example, get angry or get upset, but we no longer identify with it. So our reset button becomes our stage of development. So in the early stage of development, you get angry, then you have to do practices to get back to the self. You got to meditate, you got to do this. Once you reach that permanent stage of development, you get upset, you get angry, it passes, and you're automatically, once that's gone, you're back to the state of knowing the self. So the difference between states and stages, we coming in contact with a guru, getting Shakti Pat gives us a state experience of who we are. Then we have to do sadhana in order to attain the permanent stage of development that we experienced as a state.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I think we've probably covered it. Is there anything else you'd like to cover before we finish up?
No, you've done a beautiful job. You're really a wonderful, interviewer. I've enjoyed this immensely.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sure, it's been an absolute pleasure. So if people would like to get in contact with you, how can they find you? Do you have a website?
There's a couple of ways. One is I'm on Facebook as Brahmananda David now. I have a WhatsApp group that tells everybody where we're having our program, and it's +1 714 925 6646. And we're in the process of developing our website, but in the meantime, people can go to secondeducation.in, India.in, and that has a little bit of information about me. But I think the best way to reach me is through the WhatsApp group, +1 714 925 6646. And we have programs here in India. Right now, mostly in India. I also do retreats in Italy, occasionally in the United States, but for the most part, I'm in Rishikesh. And right now we're doing these intensives about once a month or so.
Wonderful. So I'll put links to your Facebook, your WhatsApp group. Yeah, if people want to find you, they can just, down below, click on the links. It's been an amazing conversation. I really totally enjoyed it. Absolute honor to have you on the show. Swami Brahmananda, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a joy for me as well. God bless.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the viewers and the listeners. Bye-bye.
This has been the Endless Possibilities Podcast, where the journey of spiritual awakening and energy healing unfolds. Garrett is a lifelong seeker of truth, a spiritual teacher and author, and it's his passion to delve into the profound world of consciousness. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten something from it. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, the podcast is available on YouTube and all the major podcasting platforms. Find us on Instagram at _mother_force. Take care, and we'll see you soon on the Endless Possibilities Podcast.